They didn't look me in the eye when they ended 17 years of loyalty with a sentence. No thank you. No closure. Just a subtle nod toward the door and a silence loud enough to fill the whole building. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just watching. Thank you for joining us. Every day I share interesting life stories with you. Today I want to share another touching story with you, so enjoy listening. They eliminated my position on a Monday morning. The sky was steel gray, the kind of overcast that muffles sound where even footsteps feel muted by something heavier than air. I remember the hallway to Daniel's office smelling faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee, a scent that clings to places where too many decisions are made in too little time. When I stepped inside, Vanessa from HR was already seated. That's how you know. If HR's already there, your life has already been rearranged, you're just the last to find out. Jake, Daniel said flatly, voice low and clipped, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position. Please clean out your desk by end of day. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for a reason. I didn't ask for anything. I understand, I said quietly. And I walked out. There was no dramatic pause, no demand for an explanation, no plea to remember everything I had built. Just the calm, simple acknowledgement of a man who had read the forecast before the storm arrived. Back at my desk, I moved with mechanical precision. The room felt colder than usual. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as if mourning something unspoken. I packed a photo of Andrea and Olivia both smiling beneath the golden leaves of a Vermont autumn. I packed a ceramic coffee mug with a lopsided drawing of a cat, a gift from my son when he was still in high school. The cactus I'd kept for over a decade still sat upright, its resilience outliving most office friendships. One by one, the younger employees glanced in my direction. Their gazes flickered over me like wind chimes in a faint breeze, brief, nervous, and then gone. Most of them were coders I trained myself. Bright kids. Efficient. Good with UI/UX, terrible with architecture. They didn't know where the real roots of our systems ran. And it wasn't their fault. Bethany from marketing appeared by my desk, eyes wide, words tight. Jake? I just heard. This is ridiculous. You practically built this place. I offered her a tired smile. Companies change direction, I said. But without any warning? After everything you've done. Bethany, I interrupted gently, it's fine. It wasn't. But I'd learned long ago how to make grief feel polite in public. When I left, Daniel stepped out of his office. No handshake. No farewell. Just that quiet stare, the kind of surveillance you give someone you're not sure you've finished erasing. What none of them realized, what they never bothered to learn, was that I hadn't just been their systems analyst. I had been the historian of their infrastructure. The quiet steward of everything they now relied on. Not because I was extraordinary, but because I was meticulous. I had watched Meridian grow from 2 small floors in a business park to a 12-story building with polished glass walls and quarterly performance charts. I had been there when we migrated from local servers to cloud-based solutions. I had guided us through the first acquisition, patched a 0-day vulnerability on New Year's Eve, and wrote the audit trail protocols that protected our data when the former CTO got caught in a legal mess. I had set up systems so cleanly they didn't know how to notice them anymore. But I noticed everything. Including the gradual erosion of my access over the last 3 months. Including the arrival of Jason Phillips, the suit-clad consultant with a Stanford degree, a silent laptop, and eyes that scanned code like it was beneath him. I had watched it all, documented it all. Because sometimes the quiet man in the corner isn't invisible. He's just watching who forgets to check their reflection in the glass. That night, I sat in my car, parked just beyond the shadow of the building I had once called home more than my actual house. The security badge I'd returned had been renewed 16 times. The systems I designed would outlast most of the executives upstairs. But loyalty, I learned that day, was not a currency in Daniel's world. I drove home through a gray dust that blurred the city skyline. Andrea greeted me with quiet eyes, no questions. She knew. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, she knew what silence sounded like when it had been earned with dignity and swallowed without rage. I'm going to the store, she said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. Need anything? I shook my head. After she left, I walked into my study, a small room where the past and present lived side by side. Trophies from old tech competitions. Framed schematics from a university paper I'd written before cloud storage was even a buzzword. And in the bottom drawer of my desk, tucked beneath tax folders and USB cables, was a flash drive. One of several. Years ago, I'd been asked by our legal team to develop off-site protocols for insider threat mitigation. In order to do that, I had made a case on record for remote backups. They approved it, and then promptly forgot about it. On that flash drive were files. Not just logs and configurations, but financial records, internal memos, and approvals signed by people who now pretended not to know my name. And in those records, I found something. Payments to a company no one had ever mentioned in meetings. Apex Solutions Group. Registered to a UPS box. No office. No staff. Just a name. The payments were modest at first. Then they grew. Each invoice aligned with legitimate software license renewals, except the totals were inflated by 10, sometimes 20%. Nothing flashy. Just enough to slip past casual review. Just enough to accumulate $1.8 million in 18 months. The name on the business registration? Thomas Wilcox. A Google search was all it took to confirm he was Brian Wilcox's brother-in-law, our CFO. I sat back, exhaling slowly as the room fell silent around me. This wasn't grief anymore. This wasn't anger either. It was colder than that. Sharper. More focused. They thought they'd fired the quiet IT guy. They didn't realize they'd just deleted the only person who had the master key. And Wednesday would be interesting. I wasn't angry when they fired me. Not really. But betrayal has a sound. It hums like an old server right before it crashes. You don't notice it until it's too late. They thought I was gone. But I had been planning my backup for years. Now it was time to run the update. Wednesday morning. No alarm. No button-down shirt, no commute down I-71 into Columbus. Just the silence of a house that still felt too quiet for a weekday. Andrea had already left for her walk. She knew I needed space. She always knew even before I did. I sat at the dining table nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. It would have felt peaceful if it wasn't for the storm growing quietly inside me. My laptop glowed softly as I plugged in the flash drive, the same one I retrieved Monday night from the locked drawer beneath 10 years of untouched tax folders. Click. Access granted. I scrolled through the layers of data, emails I shouldn't have had, reports no one thought I'd ever see again. I wasn't just searching. I was remembering. I remembered the memo. The one I hadn't been copied on. It outlined a modernization initiative, complete IT restructuring. Leadership, Jason Phillips. Department head, to be appointed. My name? Not there. My position? Eliminated. It was dated a month before I was fired. And that wasn't the most damning thing. The approvals for the Apex Solutions payments were all in order superficially. But beneath the signatures, buried deep in the audit logs I'd personally configured years ago, were the timestamps. Requests routed through finance, approved by Brian Wilcox. All traceable. All intact. They thought they had deleted me. But I was still part of the system. I was the system. I didn't need to hack. I didn't need to force anything. I'd written the protocols that now made their secrets transparent. And I wasn't alone anymore. That morning, I received a text from Steven, one of the junior analysts I had mentored, sharp kid, quick learner, a little too polite for his own good. Sorry about yesterday. Total BS what they did. Phillips is already moving into your old office. It's disgusting. I replied with just 3 words. Don't get involved. Because I already had everything I needed. And I wasn't about to let him get caught in the crossfire. At 9:15 a.m. I sent my first move. A simple email to Daniel. Subject, financial irregularities, urgent review needed. I kept it vague. Mentioned Apex, the vendor no one recognized, noted the questionable escalation of payments, and attached a basic breakdown. No mention of the family connection. No mention of the full $1.8 million. Just a taste. At 9:45, my phone rang. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. Jake. We need to talk immediately. This is serious. Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I drove to a quiet cafe on the edge of the city, logged into an alternate email account I'd created years ago for internal security testing. Not traceable through company systems. Another relic from a job done too well. At 10:30, Vanessa from HR emailed me. Mr. Wilson, we've received communication from you that may violate your separation agreement. Please cease all contact with Meridian employees. Further contact may result in legal action. The problem? I hadn't signed any separation agreement. I was never offered one. They were bluffing. They were scrambling. And it got better. At noon, I drove to my bank. Opened my safe deposit box, something Andrea and I rarely touched except during tax season. Inside was another flash drive. An older one. On it, a detailed archive of audit trail protocols, including who had access to what and when. I opened a spreadsheet. Brian Wilcox had manually requested elevated financial access permissions 18 months ago. Right when the Apex payments began. He had done it himself. No proxy. No junior analyst. When I returned home, 3 more calls had come in. Daniel, Vanessa, and now Jason Phillips. That was unexpected. I ignored them all. Instead, I reviewed the rest of the data. I wasn't just trying to uncover embezzlement. I was establishing motive, connection, intent. By 3 p.m., another message arrived, this time from Stephen again. They're saying you sent an email accusing them of fraud. Phillips is in an emergency meeting. Everyone's freaking out. They're locking your old accounts. Even historical access. Too late. Everything I needed was already offline. They were trying to seal a vault that had already been emptied. At 3:17, my landline rang. A number I hadn't seen in years. I picked up, heart slow, voice steady. Jake, it's Brian Wilcox. His tone was calm. Too calm. Like a man trying not to show his cards even as the table caught fire. We should talk, he said. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I didn't speak. He tried again. I understand you've been reviewing company financials. If there's something you're concerned about, the board has proper channels. The board will be very interested in Apex Solutions Group, I said flatly, and your brother-in-law. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. It told me everything I needed to know. You're making a serious mistake, he finally said. We can make this right. A generous severance. References. Whatever you need. Goodbye, Brian. I hung up. 10 minutes later, Vanessa emailed me again. This time, the severance offer was double. Attached was a confidentiality agreement, sweeping, airtight, desperate. They still thought this was about money. They didn't know what was coming. Sometimes, to fix a broken system, you have to break it first. Not with rage. Not with noise. But with precision, like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. They thought firing me would bury the truth. But I had spent years building the very code that would become their confession. Thursday morning arrived quiet and clear, the kind of morning that fools you into believing the world is stable. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, still hot enough to fog the window. Outside, the neighborhood was waking slowly, joggers, sprinklers, the hum of lawnmowers in the distance. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about patterns. I had spent my entire career studying patterns in code, in infrastructure, in people. You learn quickly that fraud isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It blends. It masquerades as routine. And Brian Wilcox's Apex scheme had whispered for almost 2 years. But it wasn't the only whisper. That morning, I opened another folder, one I hadn't looked at in years. Old logs, buried credentials, file histories, archived data captures from our payment processors and invoice chain. I began to follow another trail. This one led back 3 years. Different vendor. Lakeside Business Solutions. Not a shell, but close. A consulting firm paid for IT optimization audits, invoices filled with vague service descriptions and padded hours. It didn't stand out at the time. We had dozens of third-party vendors rotating every fiscal cycle. But Lakeside had something in common with Apex. The name on the business registration? Patricia Wilcox. Brian's wife. I sat back, stunned by the elegance of it all. Small increases in invoice totals. Legitimate services being fulfilled but at marked-up rates through family-owned shell companies. Almost invisible to auditors. Virtually impossible to trace unless you were someone who knew exactly where the lines were supposed to be. But I had one more reason to keep digging. Jason Phillips, the Golden Boy consultant. He hadn't just shown up to modernize IT. He had been part of the cleanup crew. A quick scan of procurement logs revealed the truth. Jason's contract hadn't been processed through our usual vendor system. It had been hand-approved by Daniel, bypassing 3 levels of financial oversight. Jason's real job wasn't digital transformation, it was strategic elimination. Of me. Because I was the only one who would see the gaps. The only one who remembered the legacy code that made those gaps visible. It wasn't paranoia. It was mathematics. I was the variable they needed to remove before the equation collapsed. By noon, I had compiled a 137-page report. Spreadsheets with comparative invoice analysis. Screenshots of approval logs. Archived emails between Daniel and Brian. One in particular stood out, an email with the subject line, Optimization Strategy, Q3. Harmless at first glance until I ran it through a file comparison tool. There had been a draft. And that draft included a line item budget for external audit insulation. Coded language. But unmistakable. This wasn't just fraud. It was organized. Strategic. And it had been going on longer than anyone realized. I knew I couldn't go directly to the board with this. Not yet. They had no reason to trust me. I was the disgruntled ex-employee, the ghost in the server room. But I knew one person who might listen. Robert Chin, former head of security oversight. Current board member. Semi-retired. Still sharp. We'd worked together once, 5 years ago when I was designing internal audit trails. He had asked smart questions. He had paid attention. I found his number in an old folder and dialed. Jake Wilson, he answered after 2 rings. Long time. Heard you left Meridian. Not exactly by choice, I replied. Robert, I need 15 minutes of your time. It's important. A long pause. This about why Brian and Daniel looked like they were sitting on a grenade at yesterday's board meeting? I smiled faintly. Probably. We met an hour later in a small park near downtown. I wore a simple jacket. No laptop. Just an envelope and a flash drive. I handed them over without preamble. This is everything, I said. Dates, amounts, vendor links, internal correspondence. I'm not looking for my job back. I'm not looking for money. I just want the right people to know. Robert opened the envelope and skimmed the first page. His expression changed by the second paragraph. You compiled this on your own? He asked. I nodded. You always were thorough. This checks out. Heads are going to roll, Jake. I'm counting on it. That night, Andrea made lasagna. She didn't ask questions. She didn't have to. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the kitchen like a kind of homecoming, familiar, grounding. I told him, I finally said after 2 bites. Brian. On the phone. Andrea raised an eyebrow. And? He offered me a payoff to keep quiet. She scoffed. Figures. I hesitated. Then added I said no. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's why I married you. Friday morning. The final play. I accessed the company's email server one last time, credentials still active thanks to a lazy offboarding process. At 8 a.m. sharp, every board member received a scheduled message. Before you approve Q2 bonuses, please review the attached financial analysis report. Consider it a matter of fiduciary integrity. Jake Wilson. The attachments were layered. Summary first. Evidence second. Raw data last. No room for doubt. No room for spin. At 8:17, my phone started ringing. Numbers I didn't recognize, assistants, analysts, board chairs. I ignored them all. At 9 a.m., the Emergency Finance Committee convened. At 9:32, Stephen texted. Police are here. Wilcox and Daniel being questioned in separate rooms. Phillips looks like he's going to puke. What did you do? I didn't respond. The wheels were already turning. At 10 a.m., I received a call I chose to answer. Patricia Graves, Meridian's general counsel. Mr. Wilson, she began, her tone cautious. The board is taking your report extremely seriously. Several executives have been placed on immediate administrative leave. I'm aware. We would appreciate your cooperation moving forward. You already have it, I replied. Everything I know is in that report. And everything I have is backed up in multiple secure locations. If anything happens to me or my family, copies go to the SEC, IRS, and 3 national news outlets. Silence. Understood, she finally said. I ended the call. Then I drove 20 miles outside the city to a quiet diner, ordered a black coffee, and waited. Not for news. Not for revenge. For peace. It was starting to come. There's a moment when silence becomes respect. When those who once ignored you now look for answers only you can give. I didn't need revenge. I just needed the truth to speak louder than their lies. And on a Friday morning it did in the place they least expected. Friday afternoon felt heavier than morning. Not because of the sun or the weight of the news cycle, but because the silence that followed the storm was now laced with consequences. By 2 p.m. word had leaked. Local news outlets broke headlines. Meridian Technologies executives under investigation for financial misconduct. No names. Not yet. Just whispers growing louder. I knew it wouldn't be long before those whispers turned into something else, a reckoning. At 2:13 p.m. my phone buzzed. Robert Chin. I answered on the second ring. It's a bloodbath, he said without preamble. Brian cracked the minute we showed him your report. Tried to cut a deal. Said Daniel pressured him. Daniel's denying everything. And Jason? I asked, though I already had a sense. Fled the building. HR says he packed up and left before the board even finished the report. Last known location, international flight booked for Sao Paulo. But don't worry. Legal's already in motion. Brazil won't save him, I muttered. No, it won't, Robert said. Jake, the board wants to meet you. In person. Monday. They're creating a new executive role. Chief Information Security Officer. Reports directly to the board. Independent budget. Full authority. I let the silence stretch. Not because I was surprised I'd anticipated this move, but because I needed to feel it. To understand what it meant to walk back into the same building that had once tossed me out like corrupted hardware. I'll think about it, I said quietly. That evening, I told Andrea everything. The call. The offer. The possibility of returning, but not as the man I used to be. As something else entirely. She listened, as always, without interrupting. When I finished, she poured 2 glasses of wine and asked one question. What do you want to do? That question echoed in my chest all night. Because the truth was, I didn't know. The part of me that had stayed up for 36-hour patch cycles, the part that skipped holidays for code freezes and rollback scripts, he wanted to go back and fix it. Not for them, but for the people like Steven. For the infrastructure that deserved better than buzzwords and bottom lines. But another part of me was tired. Tired of being the silent pillar. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of thinking loyalty meant protection. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. I hadn't worn a suit in years. It still fit, though the shoulders felt tighter than I remembered. Andrea smiled when she saw me, smoothing the lapel with a soft touch. You look like the man they should have listened to, she whispered. And for the first time in a long while. I felt like it. When I stepped into Meridian's lobby, the receptionist blinked twice before greeting me. Mr. Wilson. Welcome back. The words felt strange. As if the building itself didn't know what to make of me. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. Not because no one spoke, but because I was alone. For the first time, I wasn't headed to the server room. I was going up to the boardroom. 10 board members sat around a polished walnut table. The skyline of Columbus stretched behind them in clean, corporate glass. Robert gave me a subtle nod. The interim CEO, previously the COO, looked like she hadn't slept all weekend. Mr. Wilson, she began, thank you for coming. The situation you've brought to light is unprecedented. I said nothing. Just waited. The forensic team has identified nearly $5.2 million in diverted funds. Criminal charges are being finalized. Still, I didn't respond. I wasn't there for validation. I was there for clarity. Robert cleared his throat. Jake, the board has unanimously approved the creation of a new executive role, Chief Information Security Officer. Full audit authority. Independent oversight. We want you to take it. I reached into my folder and slid it across the table. These are my conditions, I said calmly. Non-negotiable. The CEO opened it. Her eyes scanned the list, eyebrows rising slightly as she read. Full audit authority across all departments. An independent budget. Veto power over any financial tech decisions. Direct reporting line to the board, bypassing executive management. This is unusual, she said slowly. So was embezzling $5.2 million, I replied. The room fell still. You have until noon, I said, standing. I have other offers. As I turned to leave, Robert asked, voice gentle but curious. Did you plan this, Jake? All along. I paused at the door. I didn't plan to be fired after 17 years. Everything after that. I met his gaze. That was just me doing what I've always done, identifying vulnerabilities and implementing security protocols. At 11:47 a.m. they called. They had accepted every condition. 6 months later, I sat in a new corner office. It overlooked the skyline, a different view, a different altitude. But the ground below was the same. The company was quieter now. Calmer. More cautious. Brian Wilcox had pled guilty. Daniel was still fighting the charges. Jason Phillips was in extradition proceedings. Almost $4.7 million had been recovered. I didn't restore the company for them. I did it for people like Steven, who now ran day-to-day IT operations under my guidance. The kid had potential. He just needed someone to see it. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. Andrea peeked in. Lunch, she asked. Yeah, I said, grabbing my jacket. As we passed through the department, voices lowered, not out of fear, but respect. They knew what had happened. They knew I could have let the company burn. But instead, I rebuilt the firewall. The elevator chimed as we descended. Andrea squeezed my hand. Happy? I considered the question carefully. The anger was gone. The betrayal, quiet now. What remained wasn't joy, but something steadier. I'm good, I said. Outside, the October sun warmed our faces as we walked to a nearby restaurant. My phone buzzed. Robert Chin. Board approved your security budget increase. Unanimous vote. I smiled faintly. No arguments. No excuses. Just trust. Andrea noticed the shift in my expression. What is it? Nothing, I said, pocketing the phone. Just thinking about bridges. Some collapse under the weight of greed. Others, once rebuilt, become stronger than ever before. And this one? I built it right this time. Some bridges are made to carry weight. Others, to test how much you're willing to lose to cross them. They thought they were burning me out of the company. But they didn't realize I was the one holding the blueprint. And the fire? I've been watching it smolder for years. There's a silence that follows justice. Not the dramatic kind, not courtroom gavel bangs or late-night confessions. No. It's the kind that fills empty hallways after the last guilty door slams shut. The kind that hums under fluorescent lights, echoing off glass walls and echo chambers alike. It's the silence of reckoning. Meridian Technologies had changed. The building looked the same. 12 stories of glass, steel, and ego. But something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface, like legacy code quietly rewritten after years of patching over the rot. Systems still functioned, clients still called, the market still watched. But behind closed doors, they whispered a new name now. Mine. The man they once called the guy in the server room had become the firewall. Not in title. In truth. In the months after I accepted the board's offer, the fallout moved like clockwork. Brian Wilcox stood trial first. Pled guilty. Rolled over faster than anyone expected, naming names with the clarity of a man desperate to reduce his sentence. His brother-in-law, his wife, even a few peripheral finance staff who'd been bribed into silence, all exposed. Daniel tried to deny everything. Claimed he'd been misled. Just the middleman, he said. But the emails, the approvals, the backdated memos with metadata that didn't lie, they painted a different picture. One of deliberate coordination and quiet profit. Jason Phillips, however, was another matter. He ran. He made it all the way to Brazil before the extradition request caught up to him. A man who built his career on buzzwords and boardroom charm was now facing hard questions in a language he didn't speak. Funny how quickly a consultant becomes a fugitive when the consulting goes wrong. But me? I didn't feel victorious. Not really. There were no champagne toasts. No redemptive speeches. Just the day-to-day reality of rebuilding what mattered: systems, trust, people. Stephen was the first person I promoted. He was younger than the others. Less seasoned. But he had something Daniel never did: respect for the architecture. For the people who'd built it. I handed him the reins of operations, trusting him the way no one had trusted me when I was in his shoes. And in the quiet hours before the meetings and audits began, we'd sometimes talk. "Do you ever regret staying here all those years?" he asked once. I stirred my coffee. "No," I said. Because I never stayed for them. I stayed for the code. The structure. The stability. And yeah, maybe I hoped it would mean something one day. "It does now," he said quietly. "But some ghosts don't go away." The empty corner office where Daniel once sat remained untouched for weeks. No one wanted to be the one to take it. Not because it was cursed, but because the shadow he left was still fresh. Some days I'd walk past it and remember that Monday morning. His voice flat. Vanessa beside him, eyes already looking past me. The way he avoided shaking my hand. "Yeah?" Now his name had been scrubbed from the directory. His portrait removed from the executive wall. As if he'd never existed. But I remembered. And that's why I stayed. Because systems forget. But people shouldn't. There were other changes too. The IT department used to be an afterthought. Now every major decision passed through us. Not just for compliance, but for ethics, for transparency, for security. I held monthly audit briefings with the board. Not one was skipped. The culture was shifting. Slowly. Unevenly. But undeniably. And yet, not everyone was happy. I received anonymous emails. Whispers from the old guard, people who resented my authority. Who missed the days when backroom deals passed unnoticed. They didn't dare speak openly. Because they knew I was watching now. And I didn't need a badge to know how to trace footprints in the system. I had written the sand. Outside the office, life returned to something gentler. Andrea and I took long walks again. We planted tomatoes. She taught me how to roast coffee beans, said I'd spent enough years drinking bad IT room brew that I deserved something better. We laughed more. Not because things were perfect, but because we had built something from the wreckage. One Sunday, Olivia came home from grad school. She looked around the house, picked up the old family photo I had retrieved from my desk that day, and smiled. "You look different, Dad," she said. "How so?" "Lighter," she said. "Like you finally let something go." I didn't respond. But she was right. That night, I sat on the porch. Stars overhead. The air sharp with the first bite of winter. I opened my laptop, logged into LinkedIn, and typed a single sentence. Never burn bridges. Just let them collapse under the weight of their own greed. I hit post. The response was immediate. Comments from former colleagues. Private messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. A quiet ripple of recognition. Not applause, but respect. And that meant more than revenge ever could. Because in the end, I hadn't just exposed a few corrupt men. I had proved that integrity still matters even in systems designed to forget it. Systems don't break all at once. They fracture quietly, piece by piece, update by update, until someone finally asks the right question. I spent 17 years holding Meridian together. And when they let me go, I didn't crash. I rebooted. And in doing so, I restored more than just code. Monday morning, The one I never thought I'd face again. I walked into Meridian Technologies not as a ghost in the background, not as a man in exile, but as Chief Information Security Officer with keys to every door and answers to every question they were now too afraid to ask themselves. The guard downstairs, Carl, the same guy who used to wave me in without looking up from his coffee, actually stood up. "Welcome back, Mr. Wilson," he said. I nodded. "Good to see you, Carl." I took the elevator to the top floor. The numbers blinked past slowly, each one carrying the weight of old memories. The hours I used to spend patching servers while the rest of the building slept. The countless all-nighters before product launches. The missed birthdays, missed anniversaries, missed moments in the name of dedication. I stepped out into the executive lobby. The place still smelled of recycled air and pine-scented polish. But something had changed, something deeper than the decor. They knew I wasn't here to keep the lights on anymore. I was here to make sure the shadows didn't return. In my new corner office, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window watching Columbus sprawl out in the morning haze. The skyline looked the same. But I didn't. The door creaked open. Stephen peeked in. "Morning, boss." "Come in," I said. He stepped inside, holding 2 coffees. I took one, smiling. "How's the team?" He shrugged, then grinned. "Efficient. Nervous. But better. I think they're still waiting for the old regime to sneak back in through a firewall. Then keep it shut." He laughed, then hesitated. "You know, you didn't have to come back. After what they did to you. You had offers. Better ones." I sipped the coffee. It was better than the server room sludge. I didn't come back for them. I came back for the system. Stephen nodded slowly, then turned to leave. "Oh, by the way," he said over his shoulder, "the board approved your updated protocol for whistleblower protection. Unanimous." That made me smile. After he left, I pulled up a draft I'd been working on for weeks, a full audit guide titled Legacy Integrity, a framework for ethical IT governance. Not a technical manual. Not really. It was part blueprint, part philosophy, something to leave behind. Because I wasn't going to be here forever. And I didn't want Meridian to forget again. Inside the document was something I had carried quietly for years, stories of mistakes we'd buried, lessons learned during breaches no one ever talked about, and the names of people who did the right thing when no one was watching. It ended with a single line. "No system is secure without someone who remembers why it was built." A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Real paper. Handwritten. It was from Robertson. "Jake, the board has voted to permanently implement your proposed cross-department security and ethics council. You were right. We didn't need better controls. We needed better conscience. Thank you for reminding us. RC." I folded the letter carefully and slid it into a file labeled Legacy. That night, Andrea and I went out to dinner. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet little Italian place she loved, the one we hadn't visited since Olivia left for grad school. The waiter recognized us, even remembered my usual order. "You look different, sir," he said with a smile. "Yeah," I replied. "I feel different." As the year came to a close, I prepared my final quarterly report. Everything was in order. No irregularities. No anomalies. No red flags. System stable. Team secure. Leadership aware. I shut the report, locked my screen, and looked out at the city again, lights twinkling like stars in a circuit board. And I realized something. I hadn't just rebuilt a broken system. I had rebuilt myself. The man who had once been content to fade into the background had become the one who held the line, not out of anger, but purpose. Not for vengeance, but integrity. And maybe that's the most powerful thing you can be in a world that forgets too quickly. Not loud, not feared, but remembered. For doing the right thing, even after they tried to delete you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel for more inspirational stories. And before you go, check out the video on your screen. It's another heartwarming story you won't want to miss.